Hey guys, let's talk now about turning 65 when you do have employer insurance. All right, the first thing is when you have employer insurance and you're turning 65, you become eligible to enroll in Medicare. So it's really important to look at your Medicare coverage, your Medicare options versus what your employer insurance is going to be like and cover and cost, and decide which one is going to meet your needs better. First thing I want to do is I want to talk about this word creditable. Creditable. Oh, I really don't know. I should have looked that up and AI should have told me how to say that word. Creditable coverage. This means that your employer plan, their drug coverage, is as good as or better than Medicare's drug coverage. That's what it means. Now, if you have creditable coverage through your employer, this means that you can stay on that plan with your employer even if you're turning 65 and you won't get a penalty for not enrolling in Medicare on time. But it's very specific. It needs to be creditable coverage. It's based on the prescription plan. Now, most employers who have 20 or more full-time employees are going to have creditable coverage. Most, not all. Now, it is a regulation that employers with these 20 or more full-time employees are supposed to give you a document every year. I believe it's in September. It's a creditable coverage document that tells you whether you do, yes, have creditable coverage or you do not have creditable coverage. And then it lets you understand that if you do, you're turning 65, you don't need to enroll in Medicare, you won't get a penalty. Or no, you don't. You're turning 65, you need to enroll in Medicare because you do not have this coverage. It's a very important word to know. A lot of the documentation, things you can read online, is going to have this word in it. That's what it means. Now, having said that, step one, you need to understand your eligibility and your options. So you need to understand if your employer coverage is creditable coverage. You don't want a penalty. Penalties with Medicare are horrible. They really are. It's not just, okay, you owe us $25 fine. It's not like that. Medicare penalties last for the rest of your life. So we don't want to end up in that boat. So number one, you need to find out if your employer coverage is creditable. And then you want to consider your special enrollment periods. This special enrollment period, the graphic on the screen is your IEP, your initial enrollment period, when you're turning 65. So really what this is telling you is you need to find out before this time period is over, these 6 months around your 65th birthday, you need to find out then if you have creditable coverage or not, preferably before this period. If you do have creditable coverage and you do decide that you want to stay on your employer plan rather than enrolling in Medicare, you need to be aware of the enrollment periods after you retire and you lose that employer coverage. So, very important to understand when you're eligible and when you can enroll. Next is comparing your coverages and your costs. So of course this is, you're going to have your left side employer plan, your right side Medicare plan, and you want to write down how much do these cost? How much are the costs for everything? How much does the plan cost monthly? Are there any deductibles until we can start the plan? What are the co-pays or co-insurances when you go to the doctor, when you have rehab, when you have lab work, when you're admitted to the hospital? What are your maximum out-of-pockets, the caps that you have to pay? All these things are what you need to compare and contrast to see which option is better than you financially. Now, you want to think about your Medigap plan options and your Medicare Advantage plan options. We went over this in another video, but when you get on Medicare, you're going to get Part A and Part B, and then pretty much everybody is going to choose whether I want the Medigap option or the Medicare Advantage plan option. So as you're thinking about, do I want to stay on my employer plan or do I want to go on Medicare, you kind of also have to look into this. Well, if I go into Medicare and I get a Medigap plan, what are my costs then? Or if I get an Advantage plan, what are my costs and my options there? So it's more than just how much does Medicare cost and how much does my employer plan cost, but what will I do once I get on Medicare? How will I, which option will I choose, and how is that going to affect the costs and the coverage? Step 4, your prescription drug coverage. Of course, this affects this. We talked about the creditable coverage, but Medicare, if your plan is not creditable, most likely Medicare is going to have a nicer, more robust drug coverage for you. But either way, you want to think about how much your drugs cost if you're taking any on your employer plan, and how much your drugs, if you're taking any, are going to cost on Medicare. There are some instances where if you're not taking any medication, you will still have to pay. So Medicare, if you need a prescription drug plan, a lot of times these will have a premium even if you're not taking any drugs. So these are all things that you really need to get into and look at the numbers about. Step 5, we need to consider other factors in the decision other than the costs. Okay, number 1, the biggest one is your family. If you have dependents on your employer plan, you need to find out if there's something else that they're going to be able to do, another plan they're going to be able to get, or could they even still remain on your employer plan if you do come off of it. I have not ran into this personally with anyone, but apparently there are employer plans now that if the main employee leaves the plan, that their spouses and their children can still remain on the plan. So always an option, but specifically something you need to think about. Next one is the network. So Medicare, as the original Medicare, has a very wide network of providers. And a lot of employer plans are going to be much more like an HMO or a PPO plan where the network is specific and you need to know about your network. So the network of who you can go see, what you can go do, all your options is another thing to think about. And the last one is enrolling. You still must enroll in Medicare when your employer coverage ends. So you need to keep that enrollment period in mind. It's not really a factor in making a decision. It's just something that you do really need to, keep in the back of your mind. Even though I'm not enrolling in Medicare now, that's what I choose. You do need to enroll later on. Some frequently asked questions. Can I delay Medicare enrollment if I have employer coverage? Well, that's actually kind of what we were talking about here. You can, if that coverage is considered creditable coverage, where the prescription drug plan is equal to or better than Medicare's prescription drug offerings. Is my employer coverage creditable? You can ask this question to your HR department. You can call the plan that you have. So if you have your Medicare or you have your employer insurance card, you can call that. You can ask them if it's a creditable plan. But you definitely need to find out, and it is the job of your employer to tell you this. And like I mentioned, they should be sending you a letter. Everyone should be getting this letter around when they're 65. And I believe it's September it comes out, telling you whether you have credible coverage or not. What if my spouse is on my employer plan? I hear this a lot. I get this conversation a lot. It's still a comparison. A spouse, you can find out if the spouse can stay on your employer plan even after you come off of it, if that's what you choose. There are also state plans, the ACA plans, Obamacare plans. Spouses can always go on those if they're not 65 and eligible for Medicare. There's other options out there other than your employee plan for your spouse. So don't just think, oh, my spouse is on my plan, so I can't do anything. Still look into it. Find out. You might need to be comparing an ACA plan, Medicare, the two of them paired with your employer plan. But, looking into all these things is going to give you a really good idea of what to do. Conclusion. Always compare your Medicare and your employer insurance costs. Even if as the years go by, so maybe you compare them when you're 65, and then next year when you're 66 and you go to re-up your employer plan, maybe they make some changes. Maybe the network is getting smaller. Maybe your health needs are getting higher. Maybe for one reason or another, after a year or two, that employer plan that you chose when you were 65, maybe it's not the best option anymore. So you always want to compare and see what's out there and see what your options are. Always take into consideration the Medigap and the Advantage plan options that you have on Medicare. Consider your prescription drug costs. This is another place where, as the years go by, maybe your prescription drug costs on your employer plan are going up, and maybe on Medicare they wouldn't be so bad. So that's another place where you want to continue to compare. And of course, remember your family needs. Ask questions. I have this on my website in several different places, but health insurance comes with time restraints. Don't wait until it's too late. I seriously would rather talk to you 6 months early. I'd rather talk to you a year or two early than one day too late where you cannot get enrolled. That's my phone number. Give me a call and we can chat about it. Leave a comment on my website or send me an email. I'm happy to chat about anything health insurance related.